Yay, what is up, GR crew? We appreciate you jumping into the after show here and supporting us. YouTube does this from time to time in some of our after shows. It says the chat is disabled. Just refresh. All you got to do is refresh this
There
page.
we
Yep, and the
go.
chat will be completely enabled. So Kim is jumping into the chat room.
Hooray.
She will pull any of your additional questions, but she has a list of questions that came from the main show that we'll just start ripping through here with Jason. But if you have additional questions, that's kind of the perk of the after shows is you get to ask those now, and we'll get through as many of them as we can in the next 10 to 14 minutes or so. What do we got?
Yeah. Great question from John in the chat room. John says, how does Coop deal with mental health issues with his clients? I assume it must come up or he suspects a problem. Does he have a process to referring a client to get help if it supports them?
Yeah. Well, and once again, as I was mentioning during the live show, it kind of all starts with having that relationship because you're never going to find that out if you don't have a personal relationship that exists beyond the X's and O's with them. I always refer it out because I am not an expert in eating disorders. I'm not an expert with mental health issues. I'm not an expert in any of those areas. What I do offer is compassion, support, and love towards whatever issue, ailment, disease, whatever run a show that the athlete is having to deal with. But I always kind of go back to athletes are always people, right? I mean, even some of the best athletes in the world that we all put up on pedestals, they can have their own, issues and demons and problems. And a lot of times if they don't have a good support network behind them and a really high quality coach can play a critical part in that support network, they can just let that, spiral out of control. And so I take that role really seriously just because for whatever reason, I was mentioning this to a really good friend of mine who I don't know if you guys have had him on your show or not, but if you haven't, you should. His name's David Clark.
Okay.
He's a former overweight addict, alcoholic who wrote a book he actually wrote a sequel to his book about his life and how he kind of turned his life around. He and I were having this conversation the other day, and for whatever reason, in my experience, my professional experience, I have a huge disproportionate number of alcoholics, drug addicts, people with mental disorder, there's athletes that have had mental disorders or they're suffering from some sort of mental disorder, or eating disorders. It's like if you were to look at my athlete list and project that on the population, it would be complete bizarro world. I mean, it's a really, really high percentage of the athletes that I've worked with. And so I've had to take that into account in my coaching practice just to make sure that I have that relationship, that I kind of know, what to look for. And then I've also built a network up, right, to where I can refer people out to,
that's good,
this service, that service, or the other service. Yeah. And I didn't realize that until about maybe 10 years ago that that's something that I needed to be more conscientious of. I've got a really good story about why I turned that around, if you guys don't mind.
Not at all. Yeah.
So I in 2000 and this person would not mind me telling this story, by the way. This is part of his whole program. I was working with a really high level athlete around 2004 that had done a lot. I mean, he was, I think he was fourth at Western States one year, and he'd been runner up in Wasatch a couple of years and things like that. And I had a really good relationship with him, spent a lot of time with him and his family, and we'd done private camps together and, this, that, and the other. And from one day to the next, he fell off the face of the earth. Totally fell off the face of the earth. I had no idea. I tried to track him down. I went total private investigator mode. I flew around to 3 or 4 different, cities and states around the country trying to find this guy because I didn't know where he was. And finally, I ran out of leads. And so he dropped off the face of the earth. 3 years later, he gives me a call out of the blue. And he had gone through a drug rehabilitation program. So he was working his 12 steps, and one of those 12 steps is to make amends and call me as part of making his amends. And he took me through the whole story. It turns out he was using cocaine the entire time I was working with him. And I had no clue at all. And he did all these races at a super high level. And I was completely oblivious to it. So bad coaching on my part. right? That I should have been a better coach to recognize that, and very fortunate that he was able to get himself out of that situation, right?
Yeah.
And he had to lean on a lot of like friends and family and things like that. But it was that moment right there, and a few other things, a few other pieces of that constellation that all came together at the same time. Where professionally, I had to say, okay, I have to get better at recognizing this part. And so I went around, I built a professional network. I went around to, colleagues and, other people that I could lean on to get kind of trained, so to speak, on how to recognize certain elements of a lot of these different areas. So it's been a really interesting focus that I've had, not focus, but a really interesting component that I've had to add to my like repertoire over the last decade or so.
You feel like there's been an increase in people being more open about discussions of these things with you?
Well, I think open in general. I think open to me as a byproduct, and not to like toot my own horn, but open to me as a byproduct is I'm just a better coach, right? I'm just better at like getting that stuff out of athletes. Not to say that I'm foolproof, but I'm a lot better at it than I was 10 or 15 years ago. But I do think that, and I think this is a really fortunate thing that's happening in the athletic community right now. But athletes are like kind of coming out on social media platforms with whatever it is, right? Here's my eating disorder and here's my whole history of it. And they use it part from a therapeutic standpoint. But a big part of that, and I don't think these athletes will realize this until, a decade later or whatever, the impact that they're able to have on other people that they don't even know. They've never met before. Anybody can follow you on Twitter, right? They're a follower on Twitter or follow on Instagram, some sort of fan or whatever. The impact that they can have on those people from oh wow, if he or she is suffering, then here's some steps that I can take is enormous. And so I think that is just I think for good has cultivated a lot of people being a lot just more willing to be open about those sorts of issues.
I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's fascinating from an ultra running perspective, though, because I can't think of another demographic that has such a high concentration with, people with eating disorders and substance abuse problems and mental disorders and psychological disorders and things like that. It's just been the most fascinating thing to watch unfold. I never would have thought that when I got into coaching. Never.
A part of me, as someone who deals with anxiety, and I'm open with my dealing with that often, it's part of like when I run alone, and it's part of being alone with your thoughts, and a part of sort of, it's not a team sport as much as having a crew and having pacers. It becomes a team. It's a pretty selfish sport. It's a pretty internal sport as well. So for me, it was clear that running helped me deal with my demons. It's also now part of the demons, and it's
until it
navigating
didn't.
until it didn't, and now it's kind of navigating that space and figuring out how to work through that. But it's interesting how running was the sport that allowed me to get into it and sort of identify what my stuff was, because it was so focused on internal thought process and mind over matter, and no other sport really did that. Cycling maybe, because there were a lot of long distance endurance cycling events that I did that sort of allowed that, but I can only speak from my perspective. But it's interesting to sort of see. I agree with you. The reason I asked the question is because I feel like I've been seeing more people in an incredible way being more open with their dealing with depression, anxiety, eating disorder, all sorts of mental disorder, and kind of removing that stigma. It's fantastic, I think, like you said, long term, to see how that does help.
Those people are heroes because their impact will far outlive themselves.
Agreed. Yeah. Lots of questions. Sorry.
Yeah. Question from Renee in the chat room. Renee says, Coop, you said earlier that our bodies adapt somewhat to use the nutrition we provide it with. Does this include water intake? Can our bodies adapt to less water during runs?
Yes, but only to a certain extent. That's really, really pointed. That's like a way of like taking my words and like twisting them around. I really appreciate that question like that. Yeah. So, I mean, your body is flexible, right? It does have limits to that adaptation. And fluid intake is adaptable to a certain extent, right? You can teach your body how to tolerate more fluids, and anybody who's gone through like a sauna protocol or done a lot of training in the heat can recognize that, right? I mean, literally, they can take in more fluids, and your body can process that. The caveat to that is you can absolutely overdrink in an ultramarathon situation, and that is, aside from lightning, the most dangerous situation ultramarathoners encounter is being overhydrated.
Is that hypo or hypernatremia?
Right. That's hyponatremic.
Hypo.
And but the dangerous combination of that. So hyponatremia is having low blood sodium levels. What that gets compounded by, and when it becomes so dangerous, is when you combine it with overhydration. So when you have high body water levels and low blood sodium levels, that's how people die. And Meredith Terranova, Paul's wife, who's a great nutritionist as well, actually is going to write. She just turned it in, actually, because I helped her edit it. An article in Ultra Running magazine that went through a case study with one of my athletes where he almost died because of that. And it's a fascinating example of, you do everything right and then you screw up something. I won't spoil the article. You do everything right, but then you screw something up after the race is done, and there can still be dire consequences for it. So I always add that caveat of your body can adapt to the amount that you can drink with. There is a limit, and you can absolutely overdrink, and the penalty for overdrinking is really, really bad.
Wow. We have to get Meredith on now too.
We can have a whole nother show just on hyponatremia.
Got to catch up with her a little bit at States
when she was helping you look for your lost phone.
Look for my lost phone in a car that smelled like broccoli.
That sounds like a story right there.
Yeah. We'll have to bring her on. We can tell the whole story. I had no idea that she was writing a paper on that. That's one of those conversations that I'm always afraid to have because of my lack of knowledge, and I don't want to punch up my belt of hypernatremia and the water belt, all that stuff. So
it's hard. I mean, I just went through, oh my gosh, maybe 4 or 5 hours of research on this from Meredith's angle, from my athlete's angle, and I reached out to a couple of other experts and things like that, and I'm still confused.
Yeah.
And I still get to this point where I'm like, God, I wish I had a stoplight system, right? I mean, we kind of want that for everything, right? We want to get yellow, green stoplight system to tell us, and that doesn't exist, and because there have been athletes that have died. I mean, even the Chicago Marathon, a few years this happened, right? Because there have been runners, marathoners, ultra runners that have died or gotten really close to dying because of hyponatremia. It just behooves everybody to make sure that we're giving the right advice, and I don't think we have a good fix on what that advice is. We being the collective, like, expert community, so to speak. I don't think we have a good fix on that in particular.
It's been interesting. Every article that I've ever read or research that I've tried to do, I get just into it and I'm already lost. Like, I'm already, it's hard. It's never quite tailored to a general audience's perspective or an educational to a naive, average person sort of mindset. So it's always been complicated. So hopefully, I'll have to reach out to Meredith. I'd love to see this. Or Ultra Running magazine when it comes out. Read it.
I think it's the September issue.
Perfect. So it's coming up. Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's get to maybe one more question for Jason.
Chad has a good question. Chad says, it's been very hot. It's been a very hot summer. Are runners hurting their potential gains by running in this heat instead of running when it's cooler outside?
Oh, that's a good question too. So one of the great things about ultramarathon running is you are in training. You're almost always running faster and harder than you are during the race, right? Your race is 50K, 50 miles, 100K, 100 miles. You can go out for a 10-mile training run or a 90-minute training run or whatever. That is almost always at a higher intensity irrespective of how hot it is or cold it is or whatever, almost always at a higher intensity than you are going to be racing. So you're never caught in this paradigm of where you're training too easy or training too slow. And I use those interchangeably intentionally in this situation, because the hot training might be hard, but it's very slow. Either way you look at it, it's still faster and harder than you're going to be running an ultra marathon at. So no, I don't think that you're hurting it unless the cumulative effect of the heat, meaning training on it day after day after day after day after day, just grinds you down so much that your overall training volume, so the number of hours that you can do in a month or 2 months or 3 months, so big picture training volume, if that heat is compromising that overall training volume, that's when you have to take a step back and look at, okay, how do I mitigate the heat? Do I need to run earlier? Do I need to run later? Do I need to go like full on Badwater style and dunk myself in, a cooler full of ice every mile, or whatever it is? When it's so hot and so relentlessly hot, that's the key. That's the key condition. When it's relentlessly hot, day after day, week after week, that's when you can run into a situation where it just starts to compromise your total training volume. Interesting anecdote. So I went to Texas A&M University. This is my class ring, class 2001, and I ran cross country there. As you can imagine, in Central Texas, in the summer, it is relentlessly hot. Day after day of 100, 104, 105, 103, triple digits, you name it. So what we did as a team, collectively as a team, is we decided to train at midnight.
Oh.
So every night or morning, whatever that was, every single day at midnight, we would all meet at my buddy's house, and we knew the pattern of all of the sprinkler systems in the surrounding neighborhoods around the campus. So we would meet at midnight and we would run from house to house that had their sprinklers on for the 2.5 months during the summer to collectively keep ourselves cool so that we could keep our training volume really high during that period. But that's a really specific circumstance. And when it's just hot day after day after day after day, 1 day, 2 day, 3 days, like we just had this heat wave on the East Coast, just suck it up and deal with it. That's not going to be that big of a deal. If it's for months, then you've got to creatively cobble together some calendar that'll help alleviate things.
Yeah, I feel like this conversation comes up right around this point.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Where the heat waves start coming in.
Excuses. They're like, wait a minute. Really? Am I hurting myself?
Maybe I should take a week off, right? It's too hot to run. Man, Jason, again, thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. Great main show, really great after show. You're answering just incredible questions with even more incredible answers. So we really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, we'll have to have you on sooner than later again, because we have so many questions.
Yeah.
Who knows? You guys might become citizens of another country by the next time I'm on, or move 5 more times.
It's also so expensive
in my office. So yeah.
GR crew, we appreciate you as well. Make sure you go follow Jason on social. Write him an email if you want, if you have additional questions, anything like that. Or if you need coaching services, he's the man. Do you have vacancies in your lineup?
Always.
Okay.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be me, right? I mean, once again, we've got a collection of coaches. I'm not always the best answer. I mean, a lot of times people come, they ask, hey, I want you to coach me. And then I'll kind of suss up the situation and I'll say, I'm not the best answer for you, but I know who is.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. So yeah, absolutely. Always taking on new athletes. And
perfect.
Yeah.
That's it for tonight's show. Thank you everyone so much. We'll see you next week, and check out the t-shirt. What do they call them?
Design?
T-shirt designs. I posted the t-shirt design.
I don't know the word
choices. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Go choose your choices for the future Ginger Runner t-shirt that's coming out, and that's pretty much it. GR is also coming soon, and we'll let you know all about that soon too. Thanks everyone. Get out there, train hard, race harder, harder than hardest. See you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.